I am Captain Ulysses S. Grant, late of the United States Army, now living in Missouri at Whitehaven near St. Louis, and I should like to reflect a bit with you about my career as a farmer. When I left Fort Humboldt, California in May of '54 to move back to St. Louis, I made an uncharacteristically braggadocio statement to my fellow officers that if you should come looking for me in 10 years, come to Missouri and you will find a successful old Missouri farmer. Sadly enough, things didn't work out quite that way for me, but more about that as I go on. I got back to Whitehaven in August of '54, and in the fall, winter, spring of 1854 into 1855, I lived with Julia at Whitehaven, the home where she'd grown up with her parents, Colonel Fred and Ellen Dent. And I began clearing timber on a 60-acre plot that her father had given her as a wedding gift. I should like to point out that he didn't give it to me, he gave it to Julia, and indeed he never gave her a deed or title to it. And he did not do that because he was very concerned that I would sell it. And he never failed to hurl barbs at me or insults about my success or lack of it, and having been an Army officer, and that he told Julia not to marry me in the first place. But I was clearing timber, and to make some money, I was cutting the timber that I cleared into cordwood and into supports for mine shafts. I had discovered that local coal mines were looking for wood to put in to brace their tunneling. So I developed that as a market for my wood that I cut. And I was hauling wood into St. Louis and selling it for $4 the cord. I never made more than $50 selling the wood, but it gave me my only source of cash income, which obviously I needed. I had no other source of income. And I got a crop in spring of '55, but not much. It wasn't much of a crop, certainly not as much as I wanted, and certainly not as much as I had planned out that it would harvest on paper. So I was able to get into some farming. In the spring of '55, we moved into Wish, the home of Julia's brother, Lewis, who was in California, being a successful merchant and a successful law career. And he'd like for us to live in his home, he said, and maintain it, and we did. So we moved in. Our third child, Ellen, we'll call her Nellie, was born on July the 4th of '55, and now we were three. And I was still struggling between cutting wood and hauling it and farming. And I'm in that push and pull of no matter where I was, I needed to be someplace else, and I can't be in two places at once. And that wore on me greatly. I was not able to get in the crop that I wanted to get in. I couldn't clear land as quickly as I wanted to clear it to farm. And I had to take the time to cut the wood into cords and into the shaft supports. And now I'm cutting timber for beams, trimming trees, and putting them on blocks to cure for the year that they needed to cure before I could use them to put in a home. So I've got three uses for wood to cut, and I'm still not able to do what I wanted to in the field. But I was struggling on it, and I'm going deeper into debt because even though I'm asking my father for loans, at least twice asking for a loan, and he never responded, for $500 at 10% interest per year. He never responded. He'd like to say he gave me $1,000. He told people he gave me $1,000 to front me and get me started, but he did not. And Colonel Dent was not forthcoming with any help either. Uh, so I'm going into debt while I'm trying to juggle cut wood and farm and not farming well at all and not making $50 a month cutting the wood. So 56, and was another year I had some chills and fever, the ague sitting on me again. I had caught the fever crossing the Isthmus of Panama, and sometimes it would recur, and I'd have heavy teeth chattering chills and feel awful and not be able to work for a few days at a time. And this, of course, wore on Julia too. She was very concerned about my health. So 56 closed, and we had moved into Wish-Ton-Wish, out of Wish-Ton-Wish, and moved into Hardscrabble in the fall of 56. I mean, we went into 1857. Now, in 1857, Julia's mother died. She'd been sick for the month of December and all through Christmas. And on January the 14th of 1857, Julia's mother died. And that was, of course, a terrible blow for her and all of us. And for me, Mrs. Dent thought a great deal of me and made that clear that she did. And then later on, as I'm trying to, in the spring of 57, I'm trying to get my crops in the field. I'm going into debt to buy seed and equipment, and a terrible depression plunges the country into economic disaster, the Panic of 57, and nobody had any money. And I was struggling with off and on ague, fever, chills, cutting wood, spending time in St. Louis and not spending time in the field, but raised a decent crop. And the prices were so depressed because of the panic, I couldn't, like all the other farmers, I couldn't give away crops. So in the spring of 57, fall of 57, I have a less than successful crop. Going into the winter of 57, in December, I was in downtown St. Louis. I'd been selling my wood, and on December the 23rd, with Christmas looming, I went into Freely's pawn shop and hocked my watch. And as the pawn ticket describes it, it's the gold lever action watch and gold chain. And I hocked it for $22 because I had no money, and Christmas is 2 days away, and I had to have some Christmas for my children. And Julia is heavy with child for our fourth child, and she, of course, was uncomfortable that far into her pregnancy and depressed about that and about my health and about the farming or the lack thereof. And I wanted to get some things to cheer her up as well as the necessities that we had to have for the baby that would soon be there. And I hocked my watch in December of 57 for $22. We moved back into Whitehaven because Mrs. Dent was gone. Mr. Dent was in grief and pain and a bit difficult to live with when we moved in to keep him company at his request to move in. And he moved into St. Louis and rented us Whitehaven. Well, I've got another 250 acres now to put under the plow that are already under the plow and wanted to plant even more. But I still don't have money to buy seed. I've got a greatly enhanced farm with available land to farm, but I don't have the money to put it under seed and under plow. So that was a pat on the back and a whack on the head at the same time. And I'm trying to work it, and I came down with a severe case of the ague and the fevers and chills. Julia got sick. The children all got sick. In fact, our oldest, Fred, came down with typhoid. And he was so desperately ill that we were greatly concerned that he was going to die. And we checked him every morning, expecting him to be gone. He survived, symptomatic with, we were told, we knew with typhoid, there's hearing loss. And Fred was deaf, quite deaf. And of course, we had the thrill of knowing he would live and the fear of thinking he might be permanently deaf. But he got over the deafness and regained his health. Julia was back on her feet, and I was still struggling. I did not have a good crop, and in the fall of 58, 1st of October of 58, I made the decision with Julia that I would sell all of my farm equipment and implements and get out of being a farmer. So from the winter of 54, 55 to the late fall harvest time of 58, my farming efforts were one disappointment after yet another, and I decided to get out of farming. And I did not know what I would do. My option, readily available option, was to go back to Covington, Kentucky with my family and go to work again in the family business. Julia did not want that to happen, as neither did I, because I loathed working in the tannery, and I knew that's where I would be, or felt with conviction that's where I would be. But some job, any job, is better than no job, and now I'm deeply in debt. Julia contacted her cousin Louisa Boggs in St. Louis, and Colonel Dent also talked to her Louisa Boggs' husband Harry Boggs of Boggs Real Estate, and they worked up an agreement that I would join Harry Boggs, and they would call the firm Boggs and Grant. So in 1859, I moved into St. Louis. After walking the streets in St. Louis looking for a job, I went to St. Louis and began my career as a real estate agent in Boggs and Grant. So those are my painful reflections about my career and my efforts, a career as a farmer, and my efforts to be a successful old Missouri farmer, which I was not. So until we come together again for reflections about my life, I am Captain Ulysses S. Grant, and I bid you adieu.